The next session is moving forward as the industry gaps and what is needed. The chair is Michael Cronk from Grass Valley, and he is the VP of Core Technologies there.
Thank you. We have panelists. I think that some of them are still getting mic'd. So we've gone through the day. A lot of information, a lot of great questions. And this last session really is addressing what are the gaps? What is needed? Where do we go from here? And to do this, I'm acting as panel chair. And then we have four esteemed colleagues from across the industry. So in the order that you're seated here, we got Glenn Reitmeier, who's not only with NBC, but also with the NABA board. And then Brad is Executive Director of AMWA and VSF and panel chair extraordinaire. And then I think that I can't see him, but that's Steve, yeah. My colleague in Ames, Vice Chairman and also CTO of Imagine. And then Chris Lennon, who does a lot of work with SMPTE and also President and CEO of is it called MediAnswers? Is how you pronounce it, right? Not MediAnswers? Okay.
No medicine.
No medicine. There you go. Just to kick this off, just had a couple things. You've seen this slide before, the J18M roadmap. And really what you've heard today is we've accomplished a lot of things. And this is from the standardization piece of that. A lot of the first 2110 installations you heard are coming out, say Q1-ish of next year. Incidentally, in terms of 2022-6, so within Ames, we've counted over 100. We had 25 reference sites with a lot of some detail about them at IBC. So there's actually a lot of IP deployments all over the place. But when we're going to talk about gaps, and it's going to be an audio participation thing as well. But there's a hint. There's a whole bunch of things that we haven't done yet. So obviously, clearly, that's a gap. And those are really additional benefits to be realized. You can build a system today, but there's things for the future. So with this panel, I wanted to, before actually we start, I wanted to, and probably just don't use mics, but kind of one word. If you had to think about the most important gap that you would like to see addressed, based on what you heard today, what would that be? And so people can just give me a couple answers. I'll take some notes, and want to see that our panel can be quick on their feet and address some of those concerns. And then I've got a few also that we'll talk about. But what do you guys see as needed in gaps? Again, hopefully a word or one sentence max, because we're going to have to move through.
Update to Brad's photo. It looks like a senior class picture.
Yeah.
I would point out that picture was before 2110, and I have a lot more gray hair.
Okay. Anybody? Yeah.
Cyber training and security protocols.
Okay, cyber training and security. Okay, got it. Yep.
Monitoring and troubleshooting.
Monitoring and troubleshooting. Okay. I'm going to take a few old school notes here. Okay. Yep.
Interoperability technical recommendations.
Okay. So we've got the standard, but beyond the standard, more detail. Okay. All right. Interoperability and technical recommendations. Okay.
I got one here.
Yep.
Artificial intelligence.
Artificial intelligence and custom measurement. Test and measurement. Yeah. Okay.
Or system monitoring.
Okay. So you can know where your system is and what it's doing.
Not that I can know, because there's so many decisions to be made, so that something smarter than me can know.
Right. Okay. Howard again.
Media device control. Seriously.
Yeah. Oh, I thought the last one was pretty serious too.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So,
I'll just
Peter.
I'll put black in my hair.
Especially like in the few applications in sports, how does moving to IP change the mean time to repair when you have a fault? So I think it parallels what Dell said, but really, I knew I could check a coax and unplug a signal here, not here, but in the IP world, what is the mean time to repair?
Mean time to repair. So I'm going to put that as an AI test manager / mean time to repair.
Yeah.
How's that? Okay. Yep.
Bandwidth management?
Bandwidth management.
From an operator's perspective, not from an engineering perspective.
Okay. All right, well, we got one more.
One more, fragility of an IP network versus an SDI infrastructure.
Resiliency or for,
Well,
Instead in reverse, right?
fragility is what I'm really thinking of. You know, no one ever plugged a DHCP server into an SDI router like everything else.
so how fragile is it? Is that, or how?
Right, how fragile is, and I mean, are we,
Okay.
software and IP are we building?
Okay, and just, oh wait, one more? Greg.
Standards compliance.
Standards compliance, certification compliance, that kind of thing. Okay, excellent. Okay, Sterling.
Transition plans.
Transition plans.
Transition from where you are to where
What time of drinks?
Okay.
Fragile.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, the disclaimer is in the next, what do we got?
45 minutes.
Yeah, 45 minutes. This will not all be solved, but after a couple of drinks, it may be. So, all right. So we'll try and get through this. I had let's see. You actually hit all the ones that I had on there. One was about virtualization, how we get there. We've had some conversation about that. But really, you've kind of hit all the ones that I had on my list. So we're not going to be able to cover all of those, gentlemen. But I think one thing that let's talk about first. I think Howard, you mentioned media and device control, and so where do we go from here on control? And I think Chris, you've got some definite experience in control, and then Brad as well. If you guys could both speak to where you are, what kind of things you've done, and maybe a path to the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's clearly one of the areas that's an opportunity, not a problem. It's a huge opportunity, going from the traditional serial type of control that we've all been knowing and loving for all these decades to IP type of control. I think it's analogous to the going from tape to files. You could do the same thing that we've always done with serial control using IP, but we'd be missing the boat if we did that, right? So the important thing is to look at what can we do differently, when we've got IP device control. Yeah, we can do a whole lot more with those devices. Yeah, we can spin up devices quickly and entire services that require a whole suite of devices. There's huge opportunity there, but I think the challenge is, again, having lived through the serial device control development of all that, we don't want to see things going in many different directions. We want to have a cohesive direction as an industry with that. We have an opportunity to do that because this is something brand new. So I think that's just a huge opportunity, and we need to think about it. Again, use my analogy of the tape to file based workflows. I think if we think about it that way, we're going to approach it correctly for going to IP control of devices.
Yeah, and Brad, you have some ongoing work on control.
Yeah, we do. It depends, though, a lot on what people mean by control. People talk about control in our industry, and they mean a number of different things, and that's because it's very important for us to be able to do our jobs, right? So there's machine control, there's 5-function VTR control or whatever. Shuba and Thomas are overseeing activity within the AMWA that's called the Network Control API. But it's not a machine control, it's actually an API into a SDN controller to ensure that the networking fabric delivers the performance that we require. Is that the same thing? Is that coordinated with a group that's working on machine control but in an IP environment? How does ISO 4, the discovery and registration thing that the AMWA has, which will tell you what's there, relate to control of machines? Well, I think that we really need to think carefully about the question of what the problem is and then go to solve it.
Thank you,
because
Mr.
I think,
Dare. Yeah, exactly.
Because I think that there are a lot of different people who are different approaches where people are saying, well, yeah, I'm doing control. But if we could take a layered approach to this and a coordinated approach to this, it may be that it works out perfectly fine that the work that Suba and Thomas are doing in kind of the network API bit coexists with work that you might do that more closely ties BXF into machine, actually making sure that resources are there and also makes use of some of the discovery and registration. But to your point, and maybe at the root of your question, is I think without an awareness of what's going on, what the different activities are, we could really end up in a big mess here.
Yeah, and Glenn, from a broadcaster perspective, when we talk about control, what do you see as the primary needs that you think about?
I'm going to go a little bit towards the further future.
Okay.
And I'll go back to the question Chris posed in terms of what problem we're solving, right? So one of the things is, if we think about control in the context of, let's say, a plate air server, okay? Well, are we controlling a plate air server, or we've got the content in the cloud anyway? Maybe what I'm really just doing is building a manifest, right? All I'm really doing is constructing a list of items that are going to be viewed. So as our distribution chains change and move more toward adaptive streaming and internet delivery all the way out to the end consumer, I think the functionality of the systems that we're controlling is going to change if we think about it differently, as in the tape-to file example that Chris gave.
Okay. And Steve, you're both CTO of Imagine, also Vice Chairman of AIMS, so you get a lot of feedback from AIMS members as well. And we talk about we need control, and yet there are systems out there today that are being controlled. What are we doing? How do we do it today? And what needs to change in terms of the things these gentlemen are talking about?
Well, I think what we're seeing today is that there's a number of different approaches that are being taken within the community, and that's normal, right? I mean, we're at an early stage in a lot of this move towards IP, move towards virtualization. But I think where Brad was heading is the really important point, which is we need to come up with a common model for doing this. Otherwise, what you end up with is just a lot of noise. If every vendor builds a different approach, if every broadcaster adopts a different system, we're never going to be able to get to the kind of scale that really moves us forward faster. And we've said it 100 times today. That's what this is all about. It's all about flexibility and it's all about agility. And so we really do need to come up with some kind of a common operating model, which is where AIMS comes in, or something like AIMS, right? There needs to be a community where people can discuss how to foster the adoption of these things, to trade information, to study best practices, and eventually to try to document some of that stuff and push it out into the community. So I think that's among the things that we're going to be working on, that's one of the keys.
Yeah, Glenn?
Yeah, I'm going to make a comment, take the direction. I'm looking over here at Matthew because we've talked about this a lot of times. I worry a little bit that one of the downfalls, one of the real issues that we face is too much flexibility. Flexibility is a good thing until you have to deliver and test and validate all of them as a supplier, and you've got to put SLAs and service requirements on them as a user. So I think one of the things to recognize is that I'm a big fan of flexibility where it creates business value, not flexibility for the sake of, I chose 720 and you chose 724. Why? Right. So I like to focus on flexibilities that create new revenue opportunities, that create they create other kind of business value for the businesses and the larger ecosystem that John was talking about. That we exist in.
Yeah.
Where do we create value?
And so, with control, this is an example of there's efforts going on. There's a universally recognized need to do better at it. On this panel we have NABA, SMPTE, VSF, and AIMS all represented. So I'm going to ask you a difficult question that I don't know how I exactly would answer, just as a disclaimer to it. But let's say we're having this same event a year from now in this very place. What things do we need to do between now and then so that we're not kind of at the same place saying, hey, control, it's an important thing. What are those things that you think matter in terms of moving the needle, moving the ball forward, I guess, and I'll just kind of go down the line. So you're first, so that's...
Okay. Yeah, so,
Glad I didn't say that.
am I lucky that I'm first? I don't know.
Glenn and I just got lucky here, that's all.
Actually,
We'll
it's going to
let
go the
you know
other
when we hear your
way.
answer.
Yeah. So, I think, if we were to, look in the crystal ball a year down the road, I would point back to what I just said here today, that I think we're at a unique juncture where we have an opportunity to do this right. And the good news is, I think we're all agreeing that we need to attack this now, and we need to do this in a kind of a consistent way, avoid confusion out there. And so, I think the mere fact that we're all up here together is a great start, right? That you need to have a conversation, because there are, this is a universally recognized, really important need in the whole media over IP area, and so nobody's going to argue with that. The problem, though, or we could say the opportunity here, is the fact that lots of different people have their own ideas of how to solve this, right? And they're attacking it from their own perspectives. Brad said it, I think, really well, that you guys are taking it from more of a network perspective. SMPTE maybe looking at it more of on a device type of approach, and then as Glenn said, maybe that's kind of irrelevant. Maybe you need to be thinking at a higher level of abstraction of what are the workflows going to be going forward. So I think between now and then, to come back and answer your question.
No, anymore. You don't have to answer the question that was asked.
Yeah, all right.
You're good.
I could run for office. That I think a dialogue between everybody who's working on this, on the vendor side, and obviously on the user side of things, because whatever is built on the vendor side is going to serve what's needed by Glenn and his friends on that side. So I think that was really interesting to me, Glenn, when you said about let's think about it from a higher level, and think about what are we really going to have to do. Maybe solving today's problems with device control over IP is maybe not exactly what we should be thinking of. We should be thinking of how is this going to transform our business, and maybe we're not thinking about device control at all. There's my answer.
All right, thank you. Steve?
So I think, in the next year, we need to make progress on the specific control surfaces that we've already discussed. ISO 4, great start. ISO 5, ISO 6. Guess what? There's going to be a 7, an 8, and a 9, right? And the reason that we'll continue working on those projects is because we will come to some agreement around the things that really do need to be controlled. A lot of what we're doing right now is focused on control of the fabric. How do I move bits through the network? But we're going to have to talk about control of the workflow. We're going to have to talk about control of the resources, right? How do I get a virtual machine? And how do I attach that virtual machine to a physical machine? That's all going to have to get discussed at some point as well. But I think what that means is, moving forward, we need as an industry to stay focused on defining almost the little atoms of control that we want to have. What I fear is, someday somebody's going to land a 300-page spec on my desk that is the Uber control spec. That's not useful. What's more useful is to take this in an iterative fashion, decide on the things that we want to control as we move forward, come up with a consensus around how to do that, and then build. But tying back to something that these guys were just talking about in terms of business control, because that's really where this is all headed, by the way. That all of these technical discussions that we're having about control, they'll produce interesting specifications, and we'll do interop testing, and that's all going to be great. But where we're really heading with this is to be able to give the people that run the businesses a layer of control so that they can implement business logic. That's what's different about the approach that we're taking, right? For so many years, the technology has defined the way the business had to be run. That's going to change over the course of the next couple of years, and the business is going to find a way to adapt to the technology that's been creating. It's the reason we all love microservices and software-defined networks and all of those other things, because eventually we're going to get to what Dell asked for. Eventually we're going to get to a point where we can have machines making decisions about how to optimize the system, how to best utilize the resources, and how to make sure that the network can be configured to meet the business's needs and not vice versa.
So let's see if this mess in my head can actually be elucidated in any kind of cogent way at all. We need to be really careful in this area of solving the problems that we know about in a way that makes it impossible for us to solve the problems we don't know about yet.
That's well stated.
What does control need to do when my son is interacting with your infrastructure to get the experience that he wants on his viewing device? In the meantime, he needs to be able to build product that he can sell to your company today. And I think there's some real challenges here. I think probably one of the really important things that we can do to advance this discussion over the next year is to think about the approach, the framework, the models within which vendors can then innovate and do their best work, rather than sitting around and developing the best 5-function VTR control system on IP we can come up with, right? And I think that that's another part of a key challenge for those of us that are working in the standardization or the specification development space. We want to develop the minimum required functionality that then opens up markets for smart people to do their best work and make money, right? And then it's up to him to go hire smart people. And if he doesn't, then somebody else is going to hire smarter people and deliver better products, and that's the way it goes, right? And that is a real challenge because we do not want to specify out creativity that otherwise the smart people he hires could build on, right? But we don't know exactly where this is headed yet. And so I think if we're going to tackle this, we really need to look at some of the models for control that are being used by the internet companies. How do they do it? How do they do microservices? What are the tools that they have delivered to their industry that then help them to innovate, rather than just sitting down and saying, well, I know about 422, what do you want to do? And well, yeah, we could do serial VTR control, but we could do it over IP with intercom functionality added because we might want to combine those. Wouldn't that be cool, right?
That's great.
Maybe we need to think a little bit more.
Well, and that's why I challenged us to take a look at where we were going as a business, in terms of, yes, we could add, the 5 VTR functions with one little tweak, but I really think that we need to admittedly, we need to start with where we are today, right? But I think the real challenge is, how do we do the next generation of technology in a way that doesn't take the limitations that we have today and carry them forward? How do we unlimit ourselves so that we can, expand the business? And I can just give you, I'll give you 2 other examples. One example clearly is target advertising. I mean, I did the linear channel, playlist composition thing is one example, but another one is just targeted ad insertion and where it happens and how it happens. Instead of pointing to an asset that is sitting on my in-house server, maybe I need to point to a cloud asset. And by the way, maybe that cloud asset is an origin server, and anyway, maybe there's a CDN access to that, and maybe that moves me forward in a way where I'm serving both my traditional linear channels as well as new app-based viewing. So ad insertion is one. Another one is graphics and personalization. And again, if you look at the migration from just a single screen, everybody sees the same thing, to app-based viewing, which is, by the way, where we're headed in ATSC 3 as well, right? Not just a small screen, they can have those kind of apps. we have to think about how we control a graphics rendering experience that's in essence a web page. And that means a different thing than graphics has traditionally meant in the control room and in sports and things like that. So admittedly, it's a huge challenge, but I think I think we're at such a significant transition point with IP that if we don't step up to that challenge, kind of shame on us. We will have limited our next generation of technology to legacy limitations that we need not.
Okay, well, I think everybody, if we have one of these next year, they'll be asking us, and we'll get a report card and all that, so pressure's on. Me too. So, Chris, you want to say one more thing before I transition?
I just wanted to re-emphasize one of the points Brad made, and kind of indirectly, that I think the lesson here is the very best standards and specifications and software that's developed is later used for something that its inventors never imagined.
Sure.
And that's the hallmark of great work, and that's what we should strive for. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so moving on from control, another topic that I think through the day, and then also when we were just getting feedback, was security. So yet another big one, but a very important one, right? So I think maybe just to go down, I think Brad, you guys are thinking about some security work. I don't know how much you can talk about already, but just to kind of give people a flavor for what AMWA's doing or thinking about in that area.
Sure. So we've started talking with our partners at the EBU about security, and I'm aware that NABA has activities ongoing, and with DPP, and right, there's a lot going on in this area. And so to kind of give you a flavor of what's in my mind here, a lot of people talk about the weather, but nobody does a damn thing about it. You know that? It just really bothers me. And it's kind of the same way about security in a way. People talk about security, and it's not a crack on the EBU or the NABA work or anybody else. There's a number of helpful lists that have been published, and all of that is terrific, sort of, because the reality is when we look at the stuff that comes into the IP showcase pre-NAB, pre-IBC activities, the basic network hygiene stuff is just horrible on a lot of that stuff. It's really bad. So we can sit down and we can look at the NIST reports and the NIST framework and this work and that work and the EBU reports and all the rest of it. And the thing is, those kind of take the starting point here. Mm-hmm. And as an industry, we're kind of, I'd have to get down on that. Direct. We're down there, right? So what can we do? And we're still in the early stages of it. But the notion is to go identify just throwing something out there, the 10 things that just have to do with good network security, and that would knock out 80% of the hacks that my son would do if he sat down in front of your piece of Grass Valley equipment and go, well, right? And then, I'm not saying this will happen because we haven't talked to our partners at the JT&M and with our IP Showcase partners, but potentially say, you know what, if you're going to bring a piece of kit to a pre-NAB or a pre-IBC qualification event, we're going to be looking at these 10 things. And, I don't know what we'll do yet, but maybe we might say, we'll talk to your people who are there and we'll tell you specifically what we found about your equipment. And we're going to take all of the results and we're going to anonymize them along with the 10 things that people should be doing, and we're going to publish that to everybody. And we're going to say, we tested these 10 things and overall the industry got a C if this was a restaurant, and you know what, if you want to eat there, go for it. I'm not, right? And you know, we can progress from there. But this is just an idea. But one other thing I would say is that security is a huge cross-cutting concern. And unless we take some bite-sized chunks out of this, we're not going to get anywhere except to have a number of really good lists that people would actually do anything with them other than not read all the way through them when they get it.
Okay. Chris, you wanted to add something?
No, I'm just gonna ask a question to Brad.
Let it rip.
There you go.
So,
I'm just making it up here.
I do the same thing, so.
Yeah, all right.
But isn't that an even bigger challenge when you're talking about openness, right? You're talking about open specifications,
Not really.
open standards.
No. Let me give you an example
Okay.
real quick. So, for example, the AMWA has discovery and registration, right? Amazon has AWS. You know what? If you want to communicate with an the current BBC R&D implementation of the discovery and registration server, it's on the network. You get the address, bang, you use the API calls, and you get a response. You want to go communicate with an AWS server, you got squat until you get a certificate from AWS.
True.
So
Okay.
why can't
So
the
even though-
AMWA say,
So even though you know how to converse, you can't even start the conversation.
without getting a certificate? So why can't the AMWA just say, you know what, at the next thing that you show up, you're going to have to follow these things that we've determined in order to get a certificate, right? Or you can go, for example, with PTP, what if somebody has a headset pack that can elect to say, I want to be a grandmaster? Or it just starts sending out messages as if it were a grandmaster. Well, maybe that shouldn't happen, and maybe we'll work with our SMPTE colleagues and figure out some basic things about PTP that we say, you know what, you got a whitelist. The answer is nobody's allowed to be a grandmaster. That's the default. And then somebody goes in specifically and says, you get to be a grandmaster, and you get to be a backup, and nobody else gets to be that, right? So anyway, the point is there's just a list of some very, very simple things we could do to start chipping away at what admittedly is, Mount Rainier, but let's start small.
But the thing we have to remember is that we are not the only industry that has these problems. We have to just keep coming back and reminding ourselves of that. Every time my engineers come and say, hey, we want to go solve such and such a problem, the first question I ask them is, who else has already solved that problem? Right? Did FinTech solve that problem? Did pharma solve that problem? Did oil and gas solve that problem? Did Amazon already solve that problem? And by the way, did they already publish an open source implementation of the way that they solved it? And we have to start adapting ourselves to that mindset, because security is a global concern. It's not something that's specific to that industry. So what I would say is, if that's something that AMWA wants to tackle, AMWA should first go and take a look around at how other people have already solved that problem.
And is it as simple as, because there is NIST has a criteria, and there's other things, EBU's published a bunch of things, right? So, and there's whole levels of security, but in terms of even the basic hygiene, right? What's to keep this industry, and including AIMS, I'm asking myself, from saying it's important enough that maybe not as part of the IP showcase interrupt, or maybe it's an offshoot of that, but that is the event. Not security is the event, not transport with security as an afterthought. But we just say, this is a goal, we're going to put that forward, and here's the gauntlet, and ask vendors to step up to that at some level, right?
Anytime you say the phrase security as an afterthought, I guarantee you, you're heading down the wrong path.
Well, that's what that's what
security has to be built in from the bottom up.
And that's what it seems to.
Well, that's the
commentary,
example
that's
that
what
I
it kind
was
of
getting
feels
at.
like so far, right?
Well, that's the example that I was getting at, was the AMWA discovery and registration thing. Before you can even talk to it, you need to have dealt with security. And that's an example of built-in from the outset. But I think that, whether it's the SMPTE community or the AES community or the AMWA, we didn't think of it. And these are the guys with the Red Bull, and that's because they're lazy. They don't want to have to go get a certificate to sit in their lab and communicate with the box. But, I mean, there's overall, I think all of our organizations have a responsibility to adopt that as a fundamental tenet. The only thing is, we're not greenfield. Everybody's coming from where they are. So if there is a information sheet that's out there that's a companion sheet to the JTNM roadmap, and what it explains in that green section, security and cloud fit, is in there from the beginning.
Yeah.
Security for media applications running on generic IT, we specifically said it follows current best practice. And we didn't say it's in there from the beginning because it's not. There's already applications that are running on generic IT platforms that aren't secure. So the best we can do for that stuff is to set the bar at that you're working according to best practices.
And Glenn, from a broadcaster perspective, what hearing this discussion is kind of ruminating in your mind. What kind of things do you think the broadcasters need to do in terms of specifying levels of security, testing for that, those types of things?
Well, some of it is clearly specifications, and some of it is working with our supplier community in terms of is the equipment capable, but some of it is operational practice within our houses too, and so that, and some of it's training and internal education. So there's a lot of elements to it. But I'll tell you, just to add to the discussion, that the thing that absolutely gives me a nightmare is thinking that when we go to an IP-based plant and infrastructure, that would be hackable to allow somebody to hijack a live television broadcast. Hijacking NBC News at night is just, that's a nightmare scenario.
Yeah. On that note.
Yeah. Sorry for that cheeriness. Wow. We have to be real about the threats.
Yeah, but I think that's what, okay, so I think that you raise a serious concern. Serious enough that we know there are broadcasters that have partners in the federal government that are trying to help us with that. And I think that's part of solving the problem is that if you're being attacked by a nation state, good luck. You need professional, serious help, right? And we're observing equipment coming in from vendors that have just the most basic stuff not done right. And so I think we have to have the appropriate response in the appropriate domain. Security is not a simple thing to address. Cross-cutting, we need to come up with a plan to address it, and hopefully soon I'll be able to bring something to the JTNM and our partners, and we'll figure out a way to start moving on this.
Great. Another topic that...
Security question.
Okay, one security question.
So, security has been sort of the red-headed stepchild in media because of the overhead that it brings, and that's been on the manufacturer side. And to your point, it's no longer something they can afford to be. So how do the manufacturers deal with that?
Oh, good. It's a manufacturer question. We can just listen to it.
Well, because the onus is that there can be no performance interference or disruption with security overhead. And at the same time, not having security opens it up to the most horrific opportunity that we all want to avoid.
So the way that we deal with that today in general is to try to keep systems separated into different domains, right? There are portions of a broadcast infrastructure which should never touch the internet. Every time I walk into a broadcast operations center and see somebody running Chrome on an operational console,
It's the worst thing that could happen.
It panics me. Yeah, what's the
Never mind.
what's the worst thing that could happen?
I'll just plug in that.
But I mean,
USB
there are
drive.
some best practices that we already do follow around how we do system design to make sure that things are properly segmented. But you're 100% right. I mean, just doing things like port scanning, right? Running a port scanning application, which is a pretty common IT function, right? That can actually have an impact on a live-to-air system, right?
Yeah.
So last week, for example, I wasn't gonna call it out, but, since you're willing to volunteer it.
All right.
But it can, right? And so we need to work through those kinds of things. And I believe that is a set of best practices that the industry has to come up with, because what you don't want is for every manufacturer to do it different, right? We want to come up with a cookbook of some kind where we can all follow a common set of
Even if you go to
procedures.
best practices and there are existing products in the marketplace that we all hate, that all are invasive and performance disruptive, and all the manufacturers say you can't use that because it doesn't meet the requirements for us to keep you on the air. So, somewhere there's got to be some mitigation.
But if it's a
how we
function,
deal with threats.
if it's a
and
function
tools.
that everybody on the buy side wants, I guarantee everybody on the sell side will build it. Now, what that may mean is we have to go back to the people that build those tools, right? This is another interesting thing. A lot of the security tools that we deal with were built for other industries, right? All the virus scanning software was not built for broadcast. It was built for this much global, much larger enterprise. But we talk to McAfee all the time, and we talk to Symantec all the time, right? We have relationships. Now, this is kind of a new thing for broadcast vendors, right? 10 years ago, we didn't talk to McAfee or Symantec. We didn't talk to VMware. We didn't talk to those guys. Now we have to. We've opened up these relationships because the industry is making this transition towards COTS, towards IT infrastructure, towards IP as its building blocks. And so those things will happen.
I would add to that, security isn't rocket science. I mean, Grass Valley's parent company, Belden, owns a security company, and talking with them, there are things that can be done, and I think we will do it and solve it. I'm going to move on to, we've probably got time for one more topic, 10 minutes.
Rats.
On education. Right, that's another big thing. How do we educate? When I looked at some of in Joel's session, there was a number of different courses that were listed and things like that. Do we have what we need? What's missing from what we need to educate?
Well, I think that the key point that was brought up in Joel's session is you got to motivate the people who need to get the education to actually sign up and do it. So you've got to remove some of the barriers that you've got there. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge. But I mean, it's obviously the case with anything brand new like this, is that you can build the most wonderful technology in the world, and if people aren't educated on what your real intent was when you developed this and how it should be used in the real world, it's never going to realize its full potential. So, I think it's incumbent upon organizations like SMPTE and others to come up with programs that are approachable and that people will actually sign up for. Which, fortunately, that's not my thing to deal with. That's Joel's. Is he still in the room?
Thanks. Ran away.
He's hiding. But I think it's absolutely critical, and it's another thing that can't wait. We're to the point now where the standards are getting far enough along that we can't say we're going to do the education 3 or 4 years from now, or you're going to get people implementing it incorrectly.
Yeah.
Well, the good thing is that the educational programs / materials, whatever we come up with, can be built in conjunction with actually building the technology and doing the reference architectures and doing the early deployments. So just the fact that we're having this conversation is the right starting point, right? But I think the thing that's really going to be key here is that people have to have the right motivation to move forward. You can't get a job in the IT industry without a CCNA, right? You've got to have some kind of a certificate that says you know what you're doing when you build a network. When will our industry get to that point where the people that are actually doing the hiring say, no, this is a minimum criteria. You've got to have this level of networking expertise. You've got to have this level of security expertise. And I think that's going to happen quickly.
So from the BSF standpoint, we do quite a bit of education with our conferences and so on, and also quite a bit of invention as well as part of the organization. The AMWA is really primarily focused on the invention, and I think we look to our partners to help with the education. We're a source for, the basic material, but then we look for partners. But I'll tell you just my personal experience and journey along with this is really to build on what you said, Steve, that there has to be personal interest.
Yeah.
The only reason I operate bare metal servers on the internet, the only reason that I participate in open source projects and home automation projects and all of that is because I don't want to not have any idea what the 24-year-old programmers are doing when she comes up to me and she starts talking about Lambda functions and event-driven architectures. And I think without that desire, I don't know, and I think everybody's said this a number of times, I don't know if there are certain people that are going to make the transition, and it is going to be I think incumbent upon us, especially those in management, whether you're on the manufacturer or the user side, to establish the appropriate regimens that need to be followed in order to get the people that you need, the appropriate training programs, maybe working with partners that people have to go through, and then, you know, getting the people on board that actually will support the operations.
So I think there's a really big role here for professional societies to play. And I look at all the great work that SMPTE does, and you know, we talk about reaching maybe a little outside of SMPTE's core sort of production community and reaching into the broadcast plants. I was talking to Sterling at lunchtime, and you know, we're talking about maybe SBE. You know, might be a good venue for reaching into some of the broadcasting community as well, and maybe even SCTE as we talk about 2110 based mezzanine level interfaces to MVPDs. So I think the professional societies have a big role to play, but it's multifaceted. So do suppliers, you know, have an important role to play in this.
Yeah, and maybe just go ahead, Felix.
I just want to add to this my personal experience in the last couple of years with building the proof of concept at the Belgium television, and now starting to build the first project. I think the hands-on will be a very accelerator for learning. And I think we need to move quickly to the part where we start building with small projects, last project you can take some risk. But you see the learning here of the people when they start to realize what it means, all this theory and all those models. It's amazing.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks you bring someone from to can explain what it is.
I fully agree. I don't know if you could hear. Could you hear it, Felix? So he basically said that hands-on training can't be overemphasized. So he's involved in some POCs, put it together, and the learning curve of the people when they actually took the theory and applied it to the actual machines was phenomenal. I know from my own experience in some early IP installations in my company, exact same thing. If you go and you build and you see and experience, you get to another level much more quickly. So I think it's an excellent point. With just a few minutes left, maybe ask a question, if you guys don't mind, of the audience in this regard, because I think when I think of the trainings that are kind of established and well known, you know, Cisco CCNA, that comes up all the time, you know, check. I have full confidence in Joel and SMPTE that, you know, there's going to be a 2110 training, check. We're going to nail that. Okay, so I think that the question that I would put to those of you, especially who are broadcasters in the room, is what else do we need in terms of kind of a formalized curriculum? What are the pieces that are missing to you, so that you would say, hey, you need to go to CCNA, you need to go to the SMPTE training on SMPTE 2110. What are the other pieces that you would like to see in the industry? And you're not a broadcaster, but you can answer, John.
You got to cover PTP in the 2110 training.
Oh, you got to cover. That's a very good point. You got to cover PTP in the 2110 training. Yep.
Is the 2110 training also going to cover troubleshooting?
Okay, well, troubleshooting.
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
System architecture, which is
system
something
architecture
that doesn't get taught anywhere.
Yeah. So system architecture, troubleshooting. I think. Well, in fact, in one of the presentations, there was a Wireshark 101.
There you go.
Was
That's
another
a good
one.
one.
So you're talking about training of people already in our industry. You want to keep current in technology. What about bringing people into the industry at the earlier levels, high school and college? I mean, don't we want to also be teaching them media engineering and making them see that there's more than just internet, but there's actually this whole industry as well that they should be coming into?
Bring back the apprenticeship programs.
Great.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to follow up on that thought. Everything we heard today was about training your traditional video engineer the basics of IP. CCNA came up a number of times. That's a fairly low level certification. I haven't heard much talk about bringing IT guys in and teaching them the basics of video engineering.
That's the tougher one.
I personally think that's the quicker route.
Okay.
I don't know.
I think you're going to find a lot of us who would disagree with you.
Yeah.
I understand, but you talk about a CCNA to get someone up to a CCNA is one point, and someone else earlier said, well, that allows me to speak to the IT guys and understand the language. Very useful for sure, but that doesn't get you all the way. That doesn't get you to run a network that's
the reality is that you need somebody from both sides. I mean, the successful projects that we've been involved in have had somebody from both sides, a really good network engineer and a really good broadcast engineer collaborating to design and build.
CCNA doesn't teach you how to architect the network.
It does. So it teaches you how to configure
or anything else to optimize it for media.
Yeah, that's right. You need to understand the media use cases. And by the way, the important part of those use cases is all the corner cases. Right, I mean, that's the wisdom that exists in the broadcast engineering community.
Okay, so Rob?
Thank you. Are any of the broadcasters on the panel currently partnering with local colleges or anything like that for sort of official training programs?
There's one broadcaster on
That's a great point.
There's one who's not on. He's got his hand up.
Anybody,
Go ahead.
it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, Fox is.
What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think NBCUniversal, not so directly, but Comcast, yeah, actually has some partnerships with
Well,
some
it
of
seems
the
like we're all sort of looking for this unicorn, but why don't we just create them?
Yeah,
Well, fair enough.
So we have a program with the University of Waterloo where we bring in co-op students every year.
Right.
Some of them even stick around.
Yeah.
Some of them stick around for a long time.
In what area are the students studying? Sorry.
They're either usually EEs or EEs, computer science, or network engineering.
Right.
Yeah. We also have a lot of student chapters for SMPTE as well at the universities, which kind of helps get kind of some of that stuff started as well.
Mike, I have a quick comment on that about creating the unicorns. One thing that I would say from the AMWA side that we've observed is that when we first started this and we were dealing with MXF and we were getting smart, sharp, young people coming in, they would look at, and I'm not pounding on MXF, but I'll just say they would look at this and they would go, this is way too hard to understand, and I'm going to go do something that's not as hard. And so one of the things that we have tried to do within the AMWA, which really gets to something that was talked about in the other panels, is compartmentalize the work, make it smaller, make it easier to understand. And what we've found is there are plenty of young people who actually still think this is a cool business to be in. But you cannot make it too hard because they'll leave and go do something that's easier.
Yeah. And in the interest of time, we got one last question.
I was just going to say one of the things we could do to help with training is using like EBU VRT as an example. Their engineers found out how much easier it was to use IP by having a little rollaway case and going out and trying to do a live event. So I think part of the training is having like little flyaway kits or little small devices that either can be logged into remotely or that people can actually go touch the buttons and find out what happens when you plug in cameras and mics and comm and see what that's like. And I think that teaches me a whole lot faster than listening to a webinar.
Yeah.
If I can touch it and figure out how to break it. Yeah.
Good feedback. So for an audience, great questions and comments, and panelists, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. So before you all run outside, we have the closing remarks, and it's Michael McEwen who's the Director General at NABA, and he's going to talk to us.
Not for very long. As our group kind of thins out, I'm very mindful that you don't keep broadcasters, operational people, engineers, and vendors away from the bar when it's all set up. A couple of things. I actually made notes like a former journalist, and one of the notes that I made was in response to John McCloskey when he talked about change management. And when I was a young journalist, it truly was the news at 6 and film at 11. There's been a lot of change in the last 45 years. And I just hope I can go through the stretch for this one. There's also a couple of great lines. One was Thomas Edwards, who got several good lines off, but in answer to a question, he said, "I prefer what works." And I love that answer. And under the be careful what you wish for, I love the Twinkie analogy. You don't want the cream of a Twinkie on the outside. And I think it was John Mallett who reminded that us folks that are on the operations engineering and vendor side have to be responsive to programmers and new ideas and how to use the new technologies by moving from the department of no to the department of yes. So it's been an interesting day. And I think the person that I have to start to thank for all of this is Thomas Bose Mason, who, when he finished the report on MOIP for NABA, immediately said, we've got to have a workshop. And I said, wait a minute. And he said, no, we got to have a workshop. So then he went to John Lee, who's chair of our technical committee, and sold the technical committee, and John brought it to the board of directors and sold it to Richard and the board of directors, who then said to me, okay, we should do this if we can make it an industry project. So we all kind of socialized with Ames and SMPTE and BSF and got together, and here we have an industry project. And what a wonderful collaboration it has been. And it's taught us a lot about ourselves. I'm very grateful for the work of Mike Cronk, Barbara Lang, Howard Luck, Brad Gilmore, Bob Rule, and others. It really has worked out very, very well. And I'm very appreciative of that. This planning group, composed of that core, is going to get together in the next week or so and kind of assess, what we've done. And if you've got feedback, you know where we all are, and you can get a hold of us and send us some comments. One of the things that we are going to do is through NBC's kind hosting. I mean, this is a wonderful facility, but we also have had audio-visual services, and we're going to take that, and I don't know, maybe I can twist Thomas's arm and a few others, and we'll edit that package, and we're going to get it up on the NABA website, and I hope our partners' websites as well, to the degree that they can accommodate that. And it allows a positive response to a couple of questions that I got from some of you, which was, well, we really need to push this down into our engineering and technicians and whatnot in our shops. That allows for that to happen. Maybe the station groups like Pearl and Sinclair can do it down to their stations as well, and we can socialize it out there, and we can get this message not to the 100-odd that sort of came throughout the day, but we can get it out to a couple of thousand. That starts the education process. So thank yous again to NBCUniversal, Glenn, Jim Starczynski. Thank you for organizing on behalf of NABA with your folks. And finally, I'd like to thank probably the two people that really made this work, which is Ann Ing and Ashley Lloyd Smanton from the NABA office. They are treasures. Well done. Bravo. And thank you for our panel chairs and all our speakers. It really was a wonderful day of content. Thank you very much.
I think the bar is that way.